Hey, welcome to the Praise and Worship Family Outreach Center podcast here. And we call it Outstanding in His Field. I'm Pastor Dave Barry, the senior pastor there. And I want you to know that we are not trying to tell you how outstanding we are. We're trying to tell you how outstanding our God is. And so today we want to share just a little quick encouragement for you. And I hope these are a blessing to you as we just get together and share just a little bit of time. And we've been talking about Abraham, what we consider the father of our faith in the natural, the one who believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. This is a role model, if you will, in the faith, because we should be, instead of holding to a covenant based on Moses and the law, we should be holding to the covenant that God made with Abraham, and by faith as opposed to by works. And he had to give us a covenant by works because we refused to live by that faith. But I hope that under this new covenant we won't make the same mistake, that we'll begin to believe God. It's just that simple. We make it complicated, but we just need to find out what he says and then believe it, and it will work in our lives. So we've been talking about Abraham, and before, as I've said, before he was Abraham, his name was Abram. And so we're trying to talk about this transformation just a little bit, because how many people know that, and we can get people to an altar and get them to, even be born again or claim to be born again, but that's when the transition starts. Understand that the work just begins. You're a new creature. You're a newborn Christian. You're a newborn in the Spirit. And so now you've got to grow in the faith. And so with that in mind, when God spoke to Abram and told him to leave his family and his homeland and his father's house and everything and go to a place he'd never been, this is a symbol of salvation itself. And so now the transformation begins, and the newness of life begins to change. So he's found himself going to a place he's never been. It's different than he thought it was. It's not a mountaintop experience. It's a lowland or a valley experience, and it's inhabited with people that he didn't expect to see when he got there. He thought God was giving him a land, and it was just going to be, Disney World. It's like we think sometimes, but sometimes there's a process to go through to get the promises of God manifested in our lives. And so Abram is going through that promise, or that transition, I'm sorry. And so we shared here, that the first time God spoke to him and he built an altar and he obeyed. The second time God spoke to him, he built an altar and then he obeyed. But the third time he decided to build an altar because he wasn't hearing the voice of the Lord, and God wasn't saying anything, and the circumstances looked different than what he had been promised by his viewpoint. And so he went up into a mountaintop, back to some more familiar territory, back to the way he used to do things a little bit, and he built an altar, and he began to call on God. We said last week, nothing wrong with calling on God. I agree with it wholly. But if you detour from the focus of the promise that God's made you to try to get him to bless another plan or bless your way of doing things, that's not going to work. And so he's experiencing some of the transition. And so by the time we get to verse 10 of Genesis chapter 12, we see that Abram is now drawn to a place, and it's because of the conditions around him that draws him to a place. And it says there was a famine in the land. There's a hunger that's created that causes us to search for the presence of God and to search for the direction of God. God usually creates a hunger, and this is symbolic in the Old Testament by a natural famine, but many times it's a famine for the Word of God, or a famine for the move of God or the presence of God. We get hungry to see that move of God or that presence of God again. And when he does, it causes us to move towards a new food source, if you will, whether it's a change of church or a change of process or a change of doing things or whatever it is. We get hungry to see God move. And when we get hungry, God can begin to change the circumstance in our lives. So it says he drew him there, and it says, Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, well, I want to stop for just a minute before I bring up the rest of this verse, because I'm not going to have a lot of time to deal with it this week. But I want you to see that the hunger was so great that he took his wife and he went down to a place to try to get provision. But he thought that when he got there, he started working out his own condition here. And he began to talk to his wife, because it's interesting, if you remember reading the verses up above, you found out that Abraham was 75 years old. Sarai was probably about 65 years old right here. And he says to her, look, we're going down here to Egypt, in verse 11. And he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, and they will save thee alive. Now, she must have been a fairly good-looking, hot senior citizen here, but he was concerned about his own life, so he asked her to lie for him and not claim to be his wife, but to claim to be his sister, so that they can get the provision that they need. Now, obviously, I'm certainly not condoning this, but you see a transition that needs to take place, because Abram has brought some of his thought patterns from the old land back here, and he's trying to get his wife to partake in it with him, because he's afraid for his life. And so the hunger is causing him to do things that he used to do to get provision, as opposed to seeking God for God's provision in the midst of this hunger. We can't lie our way into the blessings of God or the promises of God. We've got to be real to who we are and who he's made us to be. Don't try to add or take away from this promise, because God is trying to show us something here, and by doing it, he will bring you the blessing. But these are spotlights or magnifying glasses that God puts in our lives, in different portions of our life. When we get under the pressure of hunger or loss or grief, or in the midst of the struggle, sometimes when we put that heat on things, that we will turn back to our old ways and our old methods. Don't do that today. Keep your focus on the promise of God, and he'll bring you through. God bless you. We'll see you next week.